Are you ready to unlock the power within? To let go of fear, embrace vulnerability, and step into a life of alignment and fulfillment? Welcome. I'm Valina Stavropoulou, and this is a journey of unbecoming. Discovering a version of yourself you never knew existed. What does it mean to unbecome? It's about release, surrender, radical acceptance, and so much more. But what can unbecoming do for you? In each episode, I guide you on a journey to overcome self-doubt, set empowering boundaries, and uncover the untapped potential within you. Through honest storytelling, insightful interviews, and reflections drawn from my own experience of living with MS, you will find inspiration to face life's hurdles, embrace your authentic self, and thrive. Are you ready to cultivate deeper self-love, experience more joy, and live a life guided by purpose? It all starts now. Welcome to the Journey of Unbecoming, everyone. I'm Valina, your host, and thank you for being here with me. So let me start with this. What if I told you that the most spiritual thing you could do today is to stop trying to be spiritual? What if the gratitude practice that's supposed to heal you is actually keeping you stuck? And what if all those good vibes only mantras that we see everywhere are silently teaching you to abandon the most authentic parts of yourself? Today we're going to talk about toxic positivity. That pressure to stay upbeat and grateful at all costs. It can look like wisdom, but in reality, it leaves us split and disconnected. Real gratitude is not meant to make you feel better. It's meant to help you feel everything. So if you've ever felt guilty for struggling while knowing you have so much to be grateful for, just raise your hand. If you've ever been told to just think positive when your world was falling apart, nod your head. And if you've ever wondered why all that spiritual advice sometimes leaves you feeling more alone, then this episode is for you. We're going to explore what it means to be grateful for the mess, not despite it. We'll look at how your shadow, your struggles, your most human moments might actually be the most sacred parts of your story. And by the end, I want to share with you a practice that doesn't ask you to choose between being grateful and being real. The truth is that you were never supposed to choose. Your humanity doesn't make you less grateful. It makes your gratitude real. So wherever you are today, take a deep breath in and breathe out. Bring, whatever feelings you have, and let's get beautifully, messily honest together. So the slogans, good vibes only, just be grateful, stay positive, choose joy. You attract what you put out. These phrases are everywhere. You can see them across Instagram and TikTok feeds, printed on coffee mugs, shared in wellness classes. And at first glance, they sound harmless and also inspiring. Some of them indeed, they can be profoundly true and healing as well. When they come from the right place at the right time, though. But I would like to point out something here. The most dangerous spiritual bypassing happens when we use beautiful truths as weapons against our humanity. Because underneath these feel-good mantras, there is a shadow side nobody really wants to address. And that's what is called spiritual bypassing, because it's using the positivity, the gratitude, or spiritual concepts to skip over the hard part, the hard, messy emotions we don't want to face. So instead of healing,
it becomes a way of self-abandonment. When multiple sclerosis came into my life 7 years ago, I remember there were, well-meaning comments such as, everything happens for a reason, this could be for you, this would be actually good for you to stop racing. You're so strong, you've got this. And you know what I did? I absorbed every single one of those messages, and without understanding it fully, I managed to turn them against myself. And actually told myself things like, at least I don't have the primary, progressive type. At least I have remitting relapsing MS. Others have it worse. I should be grateful for what I still have. I thought I was being spiritual. I thought I was practicing gratitude. But really, what I was truly doing is that I was silencing myself from my grief, my terror, my rage, and the pure exhaustion of having my life turn upside down in like 2 weeks. That's what toxic positivity does. It doesn't let us be fully human. It demands that we look only at the light and pretend that the shadow doesn't exist. And it's so tiring, constantly trying to raise your vibration or stay high vibe, like when inside you're literally drowning. Look, gratitude that requires you to abandon yourself, to abandon half of your human experience, is not gratitude. It's actually denial covered in spiritual language. And I want you to think about it this way. Imagine you're at a friend's dinner party, and the only thing the host wants you to talk about are the good parts of your life. Every time you dare mentioning something as a challenge in your life, they cut you off with a like, oh, but look on the bright side, at least you don't have this or that. And guess, how long before you'd stop sharing anything real about you? How long before you start performing a version of yourself that isn't actually you? And isn't it what happens inside of us too? We start editing ourselves, our own stories, silencing all those parts that we think no one wants to hear, even from ourselves. It creates a kind of like emotional separation, where certain feelings are welcome at the table and others are banned from even existing. So we end up living split lives, performing gratitude and positivity on the outside, while our authentic experiences get pushed further underground. So we become strangers to ourselves, all in the name of being spiritual or evolved. And the cruel irony is that this kind of false positivity actually keeps us stuck. You cannot heal what you won't feel. You cannot integrate what you won't name. You can become whole while rejecting entire parts of your human experience. So today I want us to talk about a different kind of gratitude, one that doesn't require you to choose between being grateful and being human. One that can hold your joy, your success, your joy with the sadness, your hope with your fear, your light with your shadow. Actually, your failure and success, why not? The truth is you're not unspiritual for having hard days. You're certainly not ungrateful for acknowledging that life can be both beautiful and brutal. Sometimes in this very same moment. What if instead of bypassing, we practice spiritual companioning? Meeting ourselves exactly where we are and finding the sacred, not in perfection, but in presence. Real gratitude goes beyond thanking life for everything. It honors everything moving within you. So, how do we practice gratitude that includes rather than excludes our full human experience? And that's where we're going next. So, if toxic positivity means pushing parts of ourselves away, then authentic gratitude is the exact opposite. It's welcoming everything in. Real gratitude doesn't escape. It witnesses, it stays there. It doesn't say, I should be thankful, so let me cover this up. Instead, it says, I'm here with all of it, the light and the dark, the blessing and the burden. And this is where shadow work comes in. True gratitude means turning towards the places that you've banished, the messy, the angry, the grieving, the parts of ourselves that we've been told that they're a lot to handle. And instead of exiling them, we sit with them. We let them belong. For those of us living with chronic illness or any challenge really, gratitude becomes even more layered. There are days of tears, of fatigue that feels endless, of dark moods, mood swings, heaviness that no amount of positive thinking can erase. And yet, in the very same breath, there can also be moments of deep clarity, of compassion, or connection we might never have known otherwise. I sometimes call a mess a blessing in my life. Now I know how that sounds after especially everything that I said about toxic positivity. But hear me out. When I say that, I don't mean it in a way that everything happens for a reason or good vibes only sense. I mean it in a raw, like lived truth that this illness reshaped me, slowed me down, stripped away what didn't matter, and most importantly, like uncovered resilience and strength that I didn't know I had. So the blessing isn't the illness itself, it's what it drew out of me. The real shift for me was realizing that gratitude doesn't mean choosing only the light. It means daring to let the shadow sit at the same table too. And I'll be really honest with you here. That was very hard for me to admit because I've always been inherently positive person, the look on the bright side kind of person. That was my attitude. That was who I was. Confronting the shadow didn't come naturally. Instead, it stretched me beyond my comfort zone. But the very part I resisted was the one that began to change me. When the shadow is faced, it transforms. It stops being the enemy and it starts becoming the teacher. That's the wholeness of gratitude. It's wide enough to hold the mess without needing to make it pretty. And when we allow that, the very places we once tried to avoid often become the sources of our deepest grace. And you might be wondering, oh, right, okay, I get being grateful, alongside the mess. But grateful for the mess? I mean, that feels like a stretch and maybe even impossible. So let's talk about this a little bit more. Why would anyone be grateful for the very things that breaks us open? For the job loss that sent you spiraling, for the betrayal that ends a relationship, or for the diagnosis that changes everything. I'm not asking you to enjoy pain or pretend suffering is good for you. Not at all. I'm not suggesting you either to thank the universe for your trauma or remain positive around any sort of loss. What I'm talking about is something more radical, more expansive. Being grateful for the mess means recognizing it as part of the alchemy of life. It's the soil that new growth springs from. I'm going to give you an example here. One of my clients was made redundant from her job right after the second COVID wave. At first, it felt like her entire world has collapsed. She, understandably so, she was humiliated, she was angry, she was completely lost. She told me, though, that she was already quite fed up with the role. But still, if anyone had dared suggested gratitude in this all and, oh, look, the purpose of it, she would have screamed. But with time, her perspective began to change. Her resistance softened, and the deeper meaning of it all started to reveal itself. That loss became the turning point of her life. It forced her to ask what she really wanted instead of what she thought she should want. And she found passions that she had buried under, years of climbing the career ladder. She went back to studying. She found a new part-time job that in fact turned out to be far better than the one she lost. And this time, she chose to make space for her daughter and for pottery classes that she'd always dreamed of taking. You see, she wasn't grateful for the job that she lost, but she was deeply grateful for who she became in the aftermath. And that's the difference. Toxic gratitude says, I should be thankful for this, so let me ignore how much it hurts. But messy gratitude says, this is breaking my heart, this is really hard, but somehow it's also breaking me open to something I couldn't access before. The mess is universal, failed relationships, careers that collapse, health scares, seasons that leave us unrecognizable. And gratitude doesn't sanitize these experiences, it doesn't make them pretty. It does recognize a role in shaping who we are becoming to become, to keep becoming. Gratitude doesn't make the mess pretty, it makes it meaningful. When we can hold both the pain and the growth, the loss and the discovery, that's when we realize our wholeness includes it all. The Japanese have a concept called kintsugi. Forgive me if I mispronounce it. That's the art of repairing broken pottery with gold. Probably you've heard it already. The cracks aren't hidden, instead they're highlighted. They're made beautiful, they turned into the most precious part of the piece. And that's what happens, and that's what it means actually to be grateful for the mess. Not pretending we never fell apart, not covering up the cracks with false positivity, but honoring the breaking as part of what makes us whole. Making our scars sacred. And this is spirituality. This is part of your purpose. So how do we actually practice this kind of radical acceptance? How do we move from understanding it with our mind to embodying it in our bones? And this is a time for me to share a really nice practice with you that will bring all of this together. I call this messy gratitude and sacred witnessing. So you might like to grab a journal, but also, you can do it as a quiet reflection. There is no right or wrong way, only your way. So just take a moment to soften your breath. Maybe place a hand on your heart, another one on your belly. Stay there for a little longer. And let's start. I'm going to give you 4 questions, and there is only one rule. I don't want you to rush through them, as if you're like ticking boxes. Let each question land. Let whatever comes up be exactly what it is. Without like judgment and without really overthinking. Whatever comes first, just write down, leave it there. So let's start. What am I genuinely grateful for right now? Now, not what you think you should be grateful for, what genuinely lights you up in the moment. Maybe it's your cup of tea. Maybe it's the way the sunlight hits your face in the morning. Maybe it's like simply that you're here and you're breathing and, making an effort day in and day out. Gratitude doesn't have to be grand to be real. Let it be small. 2, what feels heavy right now? Even if I've been telling myself I should be grateful. Think about where have you been silencing your truth under the pressure to stay positive. What are you pretending is fine in your life when it's actually hurtful? Like it's actually hurts inside, it's breaking your heart. This isn't wallowing, it's witnessing. There is such relief in finally letting something that's difficult to be difficult without needing to beautify it or fix it or spiritualize it away. Number 3, how might what I'm grateful for and what I'm struggling with both be sacred? This is where the work takes place. What if you're struggling isn't evidence that you're ungrateful, but evidence that you're alive, that you care deeply, that you are human? What if both your blessings and your struggles are part of the same story? How does that sit? And last but not least, what would it feel like to hold both the beauty and the mess with equal love and kindness? Imagine your gratitude becoming like wide enough for the whole of you. Not only the parts that are very easy to love, but also the parts that are tired, the parts that are scared, anxious, angry too. What would it feel like, to offer yourself that kind of unconditional presence and acceptance? Here's you can take this a little bit deeper, like also whatever way feels authentic to you. For instance, if prayer is meaningful for you, this is where you can turn it into dialogue. So not a prayer like as asking for things to change, but prayer as honest testimony. Like you might say something like, life, spirit, universe, here's where I am. Here is what I'm grateful for, but also here's what's really painful at the moment. Help me stay present, with both. Help me find meaning and purpose in this all. And if prayer isn't part of your world, you might write a letter to yourself or even to life itself. You might speak out loud to your bedroom ceiling, or, as I love doing, look at the sky and the clouds and talk out loud like someone is truly listening to you out there. How would that feel? That's just an example. I invite you to get creative here. You see, the point isn't how you do it. The point is that it's honest, expansive, and raw. And when you practice gratitude this way, with our whole selves, we shift. We stop abandoning ourselves in the name of positivity and start companioning ourselves with presence. That's where real transformation lives, in the radical act of showing up for all of it. And in that embodiment, the mess becomes meaningful, the cracks become gold, and your wholeness finally has room to shine. So I'm going to wrap up this episode today with a nice quote from the poet Rainer Maria Rilke, who once wrote, "The only journey is the one within." It's messy, it spirals, it circles back, it breaks us open in ways we never expect. So, if this episode spoke to you, share it with someone who might benefit from this. Find me on Instagram at Mind Hierarchy or my website, mindhierarchy.com. It's an honor to share this journey with you. I'm Valina. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, keep gratitude messy, keep your heart open, and as always, keep unbecoming.
I'm Valina Stavropoulou, and you have been listening to the Journey of Unbecoming, discovering a version of yourself you never knew existed. Tune in every first and third Thursday at 9 Pacific on Transformation Talk Radio for a space where you are seen, heard, understood, and deeply supported. Remember, you do not have to find your way back to your heart alone. Each episode invites you to explore what unbecoming means for your mind, body, spirit, and emotions, a transformative process of releasing what no longer serves you. This show is not just about overcoming challenges. It is about celebrating the beauty of letting go and stepping boldly into a life of joy, purpose, and self-confidence. For more information and to connect with me, visit mindhierarchy.com.